おばんです. She woke at 3 a.m. and looked out her bedroom window. A figure in the garden, moving through beds she had torn up 3 years ago, tending plants that no longer existed, in a garden that had not been there since she moved in. By morning the garden was gone. The figure was gone. Only her own practical modern landscaping remained, as though nothing had been there at all. Don't look out your windows at 3 a.m. tonight. It is time for chapter 131. The previous garden had been elaborate. She had photographs from the property listing, dense plantings, carefully maintained beds, the work of someone who had spent years developing something specific and personal. She had torn it all up in the first month, replaced it with low-maintenance gravel and a few practical shrubs. She had not thought about the previous garden since, until 3 a.m. on a Wednesday, when she looked out her bedroom window and saw someone tending it. The beds that no longer existed were there. The plants she had removed were there. The figure moving through them clearly knew exactly what it was doing, and the garden it was tending was exactly as it had appeared in the property listing photographs, as though her 3 years of replacement had simply not registered. In the dark, at 3 a.m. The previous garden had been elaborate. She had photographs from the property listing, dense plantings, carefully maintained beds, the work of someone who had spent years developing something specific and personal. She had torn it all up in the first month, replaced it with low-maintenance gravel and a few practical shrubs. She had not thought about the previous garden since, until 3 a.m. on a Wednesday when she looked out her bedroom window and saw someone tending it. The beds that no longer existed were there. The plants she had removed were there. The figure moving through them clearly knew exactly what it was doing, and the garden it was tending was exactly as it had appeared in the property listing photographs, as though her 3 years of replacement had simply not registered. In the dark, at 3 a.m. She watched for perhaps 20 minutes without moving from the window. The figure moved through the garden with complete absorption, the particular focus of someone entirely involved in what they were doing. It did not look up, did not acknowledge the house, simply worked, moving from bed to bed with the practiced efficiency of someone who knew this garden completely, who had known it for a very long time. She could not see the figure's face clearly in the dark, could see only the movements, the way it handled the plants, the particular care it gave to certain beds over others, the way it occasionally stopped and simply stood in a specific spot, as though listening to something in the garden that she could not hear from the window above. If these stories have found their way to you, if you find yourself returning to this quiet room, there is something small you can do, like and subscribe. It tells me, and whatever else watches from this room, that you were here, and that you intend to find your way back. She went to the garden the following morning. Her garden, gravel, practical shrubs. No trace of the bed she had seen the previous night. No footprints in the gravel where the figure had walked. No evidence of any disturbance. She stood in the middle of her garden and looked at the space where the old beds had been and felt the particular disorientation of someone whose direct experience and their physical environment are telling them completely different things. She went inside and found the property listing photographs on her laptop, compared them to her memory of what she had seen from the window. The correspondence was exact. The garden she had seen at 3 a.m. was the garden from the listing photographs. Exactly. As it had been before she arrived. I wonder, have you ever replaced something that belonged deeply to someone else? A garden, a room, an arrangement that someone had spent years creating and felt afterward, not immediately but eventually, that the replacement had not entirely taken, that something of the original persisted. Granny is always listening. She researched the property's history through the local council records. The previous owner had lived in the house for 31 years, had been by all accounts available in the neighborhood association records she found online, and dedicated gardener, had won a local gardening award twice, had lived alone in the house for the last decade of her tenure, had died in the house. The garden had been her primary occupation in retirement. The listing photographs had been taken after her death by the estate agent. She looked at the photographs again with this information. At the dense and carefully maintained beds, at the 31 years of dedicated attention visible in the planting, and thought about what she had done to it in the first month after she moved in. You are still here. Good. Some stories need a witness all the way to the end. I wonder if you had known whose garden it was before you changed it. Would you have changed it? She did not see the figure again for 2 weeks. Then it was there again. 3 a.m. Wednesday. The old garden back in the dark below her window. The figure moving through it with the same absorbed attention. She watched for the full duration until the light began to change and the garden and the figure faded together as the sky lightened. She made a decision that morning. She went to the garden center when it opened, spent most of the day researching, began over the following weeks to restore what she could of the original planting from the listing photographs. She did not restore it completely, could not. She did not have the full plan, and many of the plants had been gone too long. But she restored what she could. With care she had not previously given the garden. I think about gardens that persist in the dark after they have been removed in the light, about the 31 years of attention and love that went into those beds, the particular relationship between a gardener and their garden that develops over decades of daily care. And I think about what it means for that relationship to continue in the dark at 3 a.m. on Wednesday nights after the garden itself has been replaced by gravel and practical shrubs. The figure was not haunting the garden. The figure was simply tending it, as it always had, in the only time and form still available to it, and the new occupant's decision to restore what she could, to give back something of what had been taken, is the part of this story I find most worth telling. Another whispered story from Japan shared quietly here beside the kotatsu. If you move into a house with a garden that someone else spent years creating, think carefully before you replace it. Because 31 years of devoted attention leaves something in the soil that gravel does not cover. And the person who gave those years to those beds may still be giving them. At 3 a.m. on certain nights, in the only garden that still exists for them. And if you wake at that hour and look out your window and see someone tending beds you removed, watch for a while before you go back to sleep, because what you are seeing is not frightening. It is simply love that outlasted the garden it was given to. And the kindest thing you can do, if you are willing, is give it something back. Something of what was there before you arrived. In the space that was always to someone else something much more than a garden. If this story stayed with you, if the dark or the shadow feels a little closer tonight, you know where to find me. I am always here beside the kotatsu, watching, waiting. And if you wish others to find their way here too, there is something small you can do. Like and subscribe. I would not object.